Can I tell you what I heard about Retribution initially and
Yes.
see if it was right?
Yes.
Very rarely on the investor calls did Vince McMahon ever get pressured about viewership or creative.
Mm-hmm.
And in the heart of the pandemic, he was asked, what are you doing? There's another company that is out there doing creative stuff. What are you going to do? How are you going to bring up these numbers? And I heard that Vince hastily pitched Retribution right after that group with no idea of who would be in it.
I don't have any anecdote to prove that being true. That was never told to me. Mm-hmm. But if that were true, it would not surprise me even slightly. The whole feel of it was, we don't know. I know they didn't know because I was there speaking to him about it. So this is such a long story, and I'm going to try to condense it as much as I possibly can.
Hell no, don't condense it. Make our transcriptionists do that work.
Okay. I'll try my best, man. And the timeline is going to be so fucked up. But so it's 2020, right? We're coming off Portland takeover. Me and Keith have this great feud. I don't have a real solid sense of what the booking, right? Nobody in WWE has a super solid sense of the booking or the trajectory of where things are going, especially talent. Maybe those in charge do, but talent, even the top guys get a general idea, but nothing's set in stone, right? So it seems like we're building to a triple threat at takeover, wherever it would have been that year. Tampa, maybe? Yeah. Tampa Bay, the WrestleMania takeover, which back then was on
plan
par
for Tampa.
It was on par with one of the top takeovers. I think SummerSlam was maybe the top, but which SummerSlam that year was supposed to be in Boston too, so that would have been awesome. But that didn't happen. So I have all this brand new gear for it, which no one's ever seen, right? I released a few pictures of it, but it's all sitting in my basement. Just this beautiful, like $2,000 worth of gear that says Dijak. It's modeled after who is the Emperor guy from Gladiator?
I didn't watch. I know who you mean, but I didn't watch the movie.
His character, yeah, he's whatever his name was, but he has this like white thing, like this leather white suit of armor that just looks awesome. And I have all of that for like entrance gear, and it's beautiful. And it cost me a fortune. I never used it because I didn't have a time to use it. Because Takeover got canceled and shifted to USA Network.
Oh yeah,
catastrophe. So yeah, COVID hits, disrupts everything. I start getting, I'm trying to remember again because this was 4 years ago, but I start getting like a, nobody like told me, but I started getting like a feel, like people started talking to me more like I was like in the past as opposed to the future, if that makes sense. Yes. I started to feel like more of an accessory in NXT. So I was like, oh, this is interesting. Like the people involved in the creative department and stuff like that. So I'm like, oh, I wonder if the plan was to do something at Takeover and that got shifted, and maybe because usually guys got called up in the Raw after WrestleMania. That used to be like kind of when it would happen. Not so much anymore. Now we do it. I mean, that's a whole new story, but now it's more in the draft and stuff like that. But back then it used to kind of happen after the Raw after WrestleMania. So I thought maybe there was something happening around then, but the whole timeline was screwed up and shifted around. Again, all of Raw is now at the PC for some reason, and like there's no crowd. And it's just very odd. Long story short of that portion, I get notified maybe a little bit before after I wrestled Johnny Gargano Gargano had just started being a heel with Candice. Maybe they had formed the Way or like the bare bones of the Way or something, but I was the first guy he wrestled as a heel in that run. So this was me turning babyface basically, because I had some back and forth, but ultimately this was my first like really solid babyface run. But yeah, I got notified at some point in that window that I was getting called up to Raw. And I was like, oh, great, this is wonderful. It sort of never really happened. because I started going to, and again, this is such a period of confusion in WWE.
You didn't wrestle for like on NXT for a couple months after that.
Yeah, there was
like
a couple
2.5 months.
Yeah, there was a couple month window there, which is funny in hindsight. It feels very much like what I just went through. Whenever I get called up, it's just a fucking catastrophe for some reason. Everybody's heads just start spinning. They're like, oh my God. Yeah, so yeah, I got called. I remember I got called back to NXT, even though I'd been called up and I had like shown up to Raw. But it was weird because we were already showing up to Raw because we became the fans at some point. Like NXT talent were the fans in the crowd, but we're like off camera. And then there's this weird mixed message. And Heyman was writing the show for like a week, but then he got fired and Bruce came in. It was just everything was so jumbled and weird. It was like, I didn't know who the fuck to go to talk to anyone. I'm like, I was told I got called up, but no one's approaching me with anything. I'm not even like in the locker room. Like, I don't know what's going on. So finally I get a call that's like, hey, we're going to bring you back to do a couple matches and face Cross, who they're building up to face Keith, and we want to introduce you with the Keith storyline because Keith is going to win the championship. So I think that was my first time back, was when Keith won the championship, and I gave him a hug afterwards, and then we ran the program with Cross, and Cross killed me off. And then again, now I'm back on Raw in some capacity, sort of, or maybe I never left Raw. I don't remember. It's very unclear, but I know that we're going to Raw. Like we're physically there because we're like in these tents outside, and then we go in and they have us sit there, and it's this whole production where Kevin Dunn's yelling at everyone in the ring, and it's just a silly mess through no fault of WWE's, right? They're just trying to survive COVID. So like I don't think that they did like a horrific job at that. Like they maintained a product when most things just stopped, right? Like most things didn't exist, for better or worse, in terms of your views on COVID and spreading COVID. Which, by the way, everybody in WWE got COVID.
Yeah, I remember. I certainly remember
COVID. So that was a catastrophe. We had to get tested every fucking way. It was just such a nightmare. Such a nightmare. But also unique and fun in a lot of aspects. So finally, I go straight. I'm like, I don't know what my status is, so I go straight to Vince. First impression with Vince is horrible.
Oh no!
Because man, the PC is in this weird. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the layout of the current PC, but basically, Probably not. So, like the building that you see on NXT. That's the old PC, what they now call the NXT Arena. That ring that you're seeing on television, that used to be the middle ring of all those rings that were around it. So those old pictures you used to see of the old PC with the weight room in the background. The weight room is basically the gorilla position now, and then the arena is that middle area where we used to train.
Did they build onto it? Did they expand it, or did they just remodel it?
Remodeled, totally remodeled.
Okay.
Yeah, it's exact same size, exact same building. It's just different now, just totally different. And all of that happened while I wasn't there. So I just left and came back, and it was just completely different, which was kind of freaky. But yeah, so during the pandemic time, they did like a makeshift model of what the current NXT arena is, and it was like kind of bare bones and looked real shitty, but it had a bunch of lights and stuff. So that area was where we were running TV, but the production of everything was over in the other building that's adjacent to it that I think they were just renting at the time, but now they own it because now that's the training facility. But at the time, it wasn't a training facility. It was just a big empty warehouse that they were renting with a bunch of separate rooms. And Vince's office, for whatever reason, was like 5 rooms down. So you had to kind of like breach these levels of warehouse to get to him. And like, you'd go through like the SmackDown set, and then you go through like the production meeting, and then you go through it, and finally it was like going from like boss to boss to boss. And finally, like his security guard's standing at one door. I'm like, is Vince in there? And he's like, yes. So I'm like, can I go talk to him? And he's like, yeah. So So I'm opening these doors and I don't know what's on the other side of these doors. So like I'm opening a door because again, this is a facility that I'm not familiar with because it was just someone else's facility that happened to be near the PC for a long time. So I'm opening this door and I don't know what's behind it. I'm like, maybe it's Vince like sitting at a desk, like, and I open it and it's like a production meeting and it's like a bunch of writers and they all stop and look at me. And Vince is talking to Jason Jordan. I'm just standing there in the doorway and I'm like, oh, fuck. Because I'm clearly interrupting something and I didn't know. So now I'm just standing in the doorway waiting for them to finish. And they talked for what felt like a half hour, but was probably more like 8 minutes.
Yes.
But I'm standing there awkwardly forever. Finally, he finishes. He like looks at me and like smiles and waves. And I walk over. I introduce myself to him. I'm like, hey, it's nice to meet you. My name's, I don't remember what I said. I'm Dominic Dijak on NXT. I've been told that I'm called up. I just want to know if there's anything that you're looking for specifically. And his response was like, have you talked to Bruce Pritchard? And I was like, yeah, I've talked to Bruce. And he's like, okay, well, he does the creative stuff. And I was like, okay, good. And from that moment, I was like, okay, I'm fucked because he doesn't know who I am. He doesn't give a shit. Because like at that point, right, if you were on NXT, like there was a pretty clear idea if Vince knew who you were or not, and that pretty much dictated how your main roster run was going to go. And I was like, okay, I'm fucked. So, and through the grapevine, I heard that he was not happy with that at all. He didn't like that I came into him and I approached him.
Really?
Yeah. I guess I was wearing like because they told us to wear like casual stuff. As we were fans of the others, so I was wearing like a tank top or whatever. So I guess he wanted me in like a suit and to call him sir and whatever. But then he had to talk with me a month later. Hilarious talk in hindsight about professionalism and and speaking to oh my God, it's such a fever dream. I'm skipping ahead. Retribution debuts. It's a catastrophe. It's a bunch of writers or extras or small little people throwing things and going, yeah.
A man waddled towards the camera at once, and he's like, you better watch out.
Absolutely horrible. But I viewed it as an opportunity. I said, okay, I can fix this. I can make Retribution a fucking awesome thing.
Yes.
So I go to Vince. I film my own pitch where I have like my own mask that I made that kind of looks like the T-bar mask, but not really.
Yes.
And it was meant to be an entrance mask. So I filmed the pitch where I'm talking like this, and I take the mask off, and I'm cutting this promo, and it's all dark and lit and stuff like that. And I take that video in. This is now my second time meeting Vince. It's like a month later. I take it in to show it to him. I'm like, this is what I think Retribution could be. I had a list. I wrote up a list of like names. Like I think like Nikki Cross was on there. Damo was on there. A lot of the people who ended up in Retribution were on there. It was like Brennan was in there, or Mason D. Madden was in there. Shane Thorne was on there. I think I put Tommaso Ciampa. I just listed like 7 or 8 people who I thought would fit this kind of like, we're angry at the company and we want to take them out sort of revolution type group. And I said, here's who I think would fit in this group. I think this is the vibe. I think this is the theme. And he watched the video and he had basically no feedback for any of that. But he gave me a 5-minute talk on like professionalism and like talking to people who own companies. He's like, you need to be more professional. You need to present yourself better. You need to do that. He's like, not me. I'm one of the boys. But I'm like, okay, clearly you're referring to you. Like this is what. But that's just kind of how Vince operated. He operated in this weird bubble where like
he certainly did.
Had a view of himself that was not the view that he projected, and it was just all very surreal. So I present it and I'm like, all right, that fucked. No, he doesn't care. but then 2 weeks later, it kind of starts to happen. And like Mason shows up in the group as a hooded character. And then another person I pitched shows up as a hooded character. And then I show up as a hooded character. And I'm like, oh, I think he kind of maybe listened, or somebody listened to this pitch in some capacity. Because I think I sent it to Bruce and the Raw team and whoever as well. So it kind of starts to happen. I'm like, oh shit, this is awesome. we're all getting called up, and we all there, because at this point there's kind of a focus on Retribution. Like it's like the lights go out and Randy Orton punt kicks Ric Flair, and it's like it's integrated in the whole program. I know a lot of people weren't watching or hated watching during the pandemic they had very good reason to do so, but at that point it's a focal point of Monday Night Raw, and it's like, oh shit, this is becoming a thing. And then the more we do it, the more steam it gets. People are starting, because originally it started and they were like, everyone looks like a child, screaming and throwing a temper tantrum. But the more that we did it, the more actual pro wrestlers did it. And now me and Mace are next to each other, and we're big and imposing in these ski masks. And we got Shane in there, and he looks good, and everybody's hitting each other hard. And the segments are actually going well. Like we beat up Dominic Mysterio, we beat up Keith, we beat up Drew, we beat up Braun, we beat up, there was a bunch of weeks in a row where it was like, this is going really well. We're on Raw and SmackDown. And then suddenly it's like, boom, and it falls off a cliff because they're like, you guys can't be on SmackDown anymore. And I don't think anyone told us, but we heard that it was because Fox didn't like it. Yeah. And that's when it was like, boom, this fell off a cliff. And it was before we had like officially debuted, so we're like, oh, we're screwed. They can just trash the whole thing because like no one's seen our faces, no nothing, no anything.
How far into that? Like by the time that we saw the first people waddling on screen, did you know you were going to be in Retribution, or did that come after?
No,
oh, man,
no, nobody knew. The first time you saw them on screen when they threw Molotov cocktails at the generator, I don't even think I was officially on Raw. I was like in a middle ground, but I don't even think I saw it as an opportunity because I was in this meandering middle ground where it was like, they don't know how to use me. They have no plan for me. I see this faction. I'm like, I have friends who I like who are very talented and in a similar boat. I'm just going to go for it and say, hey, I don't think you have a plan for this. Let me give you a plan. And it kind of started to work.
So you presenting that, you didn't think that like they had considered you for it. You were just kind of throwing your hat in the ring.
Oh, I'm 1,000% sure that they had not considered me for it. I don't think they'd considered anyone. I don't think there was a plan at all.
It's nuts. That's so nuts.
Watching the program, you can reasonably discern that they didn't have a plan.
Of course.
It was literally just like writers and extras and nonsense.
And yeah, based on everything I had heard about it, it was very hasty. Like the way the story was told to me was after that call, he had a meeting at some point and said, come up with something, let's do it. And then they hastily put it together for, I guess, the next week, I think it was.
It might have been the next day. It could have been.
Yes.
It was very fast. Because they didn't even talk about it until like 3 p.m. that day when they're like, a new group is debuting on Monday Night Raw, and they call themselves Retribution. I'm like, why would they send a press release? Like, that's very odd for a bunch of
none of it made sense. Why would they hire these people?
No, it made zero sense. Anyway, so we're doing the thing. We're doing the masks. It's all getting better, right? It's not great, but it's getting better. It's trending in a good direction. And we're pitching stuff like crazy. Like I think I pitched like names. I wanted the names like big and capitalized, like Dijak, Dio, because Mason was Dio Madden at the time. So just Dijak, just Dio, just Thorn, like these one name, big capital letter, impactful things. We wear these entrance masks because the company has betrayed us, right? Karrion Kross killed me off. I'm angry at the company. This guy got betrayed by his tag partner. This guy got, we all had these reasons and this motivation. We presented all of this. And then just one day, just like a big fucking hammer, it just came down and it was like, boom, here's your masks. Oh, cool. Are they entrance masks? Nope. You wear them all the time. Oh, shit. Okay. Maybe we can make that work. Your name is going to be T-Bar. Your name is going to be Slapjack. Your name is going to be Mace. And we're like, fuck.
So all of you knew these suck, I assume.
He wants you to paint your face and do all this stuff. And we're like, fuck. It's like, and in the back of our heads, we're like, okay, at least it's us, right? Because at this point, we don't have main roster contracts. And this is at a point in WWE history where where Vince can just go, fuck him, fire him. And just like, it didn't work, fire him. And that happened all the time. So like our jobs are on the line now. So we're like, okay, at least it's still being pushed. At least it's our faces are out now, so they can't just replace us. Also, while this is happening, or a little bit after this happened, so our faces are out. So we're like, good. Now they have to use us. They have to give us these contracts, even if it's terrible and we know it's terrible and the names are terrible and all this stuff is terrible. And they want us talking like this with the voice changers and blah, 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 blah. Even though we know it's all bad, it's like, at least we're here and we're going to get pushed. And it's fake fighting. It's pretend nonsense. So we can, if you push us, it will get over no matter what, right? If you can do the silliest shit in the world, but if it gets pushed and you throw a bunch of championships on it, people will be like, hey, that's the cool thing now. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Obviously that didn't happen.